Yeah, I would say like in one line, it's basically like screen sharing that doesn't suck.
So, Johnny, great to talk to you. I couldn't help but notice you're a bit of a Zig fan. You're streaming Zig. You've done talks about Zig at a Toronto conference, which sounded really interesting. Tell me about Zig. What's the interest in Zig?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've been an engineer for professionally for about 15 years now, and I think I got into Zig probably about 5 years ago. And this was after a long stint of being into another similar language called D. So I did D for, I want to say, about 10 years, and eventually transitioned to Zig. And so, yeah, a lot of what I do nowadays is definitely centered around that language. I've incorporated it into my job. And yeah, it's my language of choice nowadays. So it's got kind of its own philosophy, which is trying to keep the language small and simple. And I find that when I'm using it, I spend a lot more time debugging my program rather than debugging the language, which it can be frustrating. Like, because at my current job, we use C++ quite a bit. And I definitely have those days where I lose a lot of time and bang my head against the wall trying to just understand what the C++ is doing. And I have this other language which I use for other things, and I just see it in the distance, but I can't use it in these situations. So yeah, I enjoy it a lot. I was surprised at I didn't think I would like such a simple language, so I was surprised how much I took to it. But yeah, over time, I've just really enjoyed using it and hope to continue using it.
Okay, cool. I'm going to come back to Zig in a minute because you said something there about D that interests me.
Mm.
I have not come across many people using D. I know a lot of C++ developers, I know a lot of C developers, and a lot of people that wanted to start using D, but never really got much of a chance. So have you managed to use it in production, or has it just been hobby?
Yeah, I actually did a little bit of contracting with a company in London. They're called Symmetry Investments, and they are using D in production. So they use it to write investor trading tools and, their special sauce for investing, which has to be, real time and really fast. So they're using D for that, which is exciting and cool. And I used D quite a bit. I created my own standard library. D has this mode called Better C, but their standard library doesn't work with Better C. So I sort of wrote my own standard library that worked with it, which was really fun. I remember I wrote an entire user space, like a minimal Linux user space, it completely in D, which was really educational, learning Linux and its kernel APIs. But that is just to say, I wrote a lot of stuff in D and learned a lot about programming in general when I was using the language. And D takes, I would say, it's somewhere in between Zig and C++. I would say it's closer. It's closer to C++ in that it has a lot of features in the language. It's definitely a kitchen sink language where it has everything, which makes it really fun and really cool as a programmer. Like you have all these tools, all these fancy little things you can do and learn about. And I guess that's ultimately why I ended up moving to Zig was I realized I don't know if I really like all these things in my day-to-day programming, but it was definitely a big learning experience, and I felt like I've experienced both extremes and have decided which side of the fence I land on now. But
So that's why it came back to Zig then. You're looking for that smaller subset that fits. Okay.
yeah,
Nice.
and it's the creators of the languages just have different philosophies. I kind of think of them as like mathematical decision functions. Like you have the creator of the D language and the creator of the Zig language, and they have slightly different philosophies, but over time their languages diverge quite a bit because of some very seemingly small differences. But I do find that because Zig is a lot simpler, a lot of the foundational stuff really gets becomes robust and works well. And with D, you have a lot of features, but some of the core fundamental stuff doesn't always work the way you'd expect, or it just doesn't work sometimes. And But you have all this other stuff to rely on. So I tend to like having where like the core really works all the time and is really solid, even though you don't get all the features. So that's the trade-off.
Cool. So I haven't tried Zig, but I've gotten to really appreciate Go over the last couple of years for the same reason. So I started off doing C a long time ago. Got a bit frustrated that there was so much missing from the language. Like, why don't I have a linked list and a dictionary here? And why should I create them for each project? Because somebody other code wrote last time. Oh, hey, there's this C++, and I've got a list, and I've got a vector, and I've got a map all built into the language. I don't have to reinvent all these things. Then after years of that, I got to discovering Python. It's like, oh, this is a lot better. I don't have to compile it. I don't have to fight a makefile. I can focus on the business logic, and actually the bits that I need the performance for are in NumPy or some other library, so I can just focus on the business value, and quite like Python for a bit. Gotten to really like Go over the last few years. So again, that it takes me back, reminds me a lot of C, and it's a very small language. There's not much there, but it's got more that batteries included element from Python. So I've got quite a complete standard library without being like so over the top. So how does Zig compare to that?
Yeah, well, you mentioned Python. I'm a big fan of Python. I think it's a really great scripting. One of the best scripting languages. I use it quite a bit, especially for things like build systems. I find it extremely useful. We use it in Tuple as well. So in terms of, like you mentioned C and Python, and Zig sort of has like definitely a more substantial standard library than something like C. C's, your absolute bare bones. Like nobody should have a standard library like C. That's like, the minimum. I would say a unique thing to point out in this space is Zig standard library. Most languages in Zig space, like Rust and Go and Nim and D and all these languages, they tend to work on top of the standard C library. Tend to, like, sometimes you don't always have to, but Zig is really, as a first class citizen, is meant to circumvent the standard C library, be an alternative to the standard C library. So Zig has really, I would say, top shelf support in working alongside C. But also, I think the main use case for Zig is to completely cut out C if possible and work with the underlying platform directly. And we actually, there was a practical example of where this can be useful. So on Windows, the standard library C runtime dependency is kind of a mess. They have this thing called MSVCRT. You may have like started an executable once and seen like an error message pop up that says missing MSVCRT DLL or whatever. But some people will see that. What that is that application linked to a specific version of the C runtime dynamically. So that DLL needs to be installed, and the developer may not have realized they added this dependency. And what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to now put your application into an installer, and then that installer needs to install something called the VC redistributable runtime. And most people who've used Windows a lot have seen that as well. So there was some disconnect in that process, which is why that was broken. And then the alternative, so you can either choose this route where you dynamically link and then add the redistributable, or you can use the static linking. But the static linking means that you take that DLL and you just embed it inside of your executable. So you add 2 megabytes to your executable. So if you're if you're only a handful of megabytes, you have to add this whole 2 megabytes of the standard C library. Probably you may only be using a small percentage of it, but you still have to link in the whole thing. So there's not like a great option. So the way Tuple works is our installer is a standalone executable, and its only job is to extract and install the actual big Tuple executable. So it's our installer. I think it started out as like 8 megabytes or something. So if we wrote this installer in C, we'd be adding 2 megabytes to that 8 megabyte installer just because we're using C. So I opted to instead write it in Zig, and then we got to save those 2 megabytes on our installer. So it was just like, write this few hundred lines of code in Zig and you save 2 megabytes, or write it in C. And that was obvious choice and one of the practical benefits. that you get. So
Yeah, that was another reason I think I enjoyed moving to Python when I was working on Windows, getting away from all that DLL hell,
yeah.
all the the
Oh yeah.
redistributable, and how do we make sure we've got just the right mixture on that machine? How do we make sure we've got the right version of everything installed? Packaging up and making distributable things on Windows always seemed a bit way harder than it should have been.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I do not miss that. Because one of the things I like with Go, though, is that it's very small runtime, so I can just compile everything into one binary and ship that.
Yeah, when it works, I had this is like a really funny combination, but somebody put out an article that was like using have you heard of Seago? Okay, so somebody was using Seago, and somebody posted an article about using the Zig compiler to cross-compile Seago. So because Zig's a cross-compiler, out of the box, Zig has a pretty solid stance that if you have the Zig compiler, you should be able to compile to any of the supported targets from any target. So out of the box cross compilation is really nice. So if you're using Seago, you translate your Go code to C, and then you can use Zig to compile that, because Zig is a C compiler as well. So you can use Zig to cross-compile to any target. So it basically makes your Seago cross-compilable. So it was a cool article. So somebody was using this to, they were writing a .NET application with Go, and they were trying to compile it for Windows ARM. So they were using Zig to cross-compile it to Windows ARM. So there's a lot of like moving pieces here, and it wasn't working. I ended up spending, over the course of a year, he would just, I happened to comment on the Zig issue and suggested something to help. So he started reaching out to me on Discord. And so, yeah, over the course of a year, he kept reaching out, and we kept jumping on calls, and I kept helping him debug this issue. And we eventually tracked the fundamental issue down to a bug in Go runtime's assembly code in their like signal handling code. So that was, I would say, quite an adventure, but I learned a lot through it. And it was an interesting experience, I would say.
Cool. It seems that you're quite digging into things like that. I saw a talk you did on YouTube. You seem to be digging into APIs and X windows with Zig and getting Doom to run. What was all that about?
Yeah, I guess it was sort of like motivated by really trying to understand graphics. So how do you make a GUI application work? Like, what are the techniques that OSs are using to get buttons on the screen and make it interact? And so X is a unique one because you can run it remotely. You can run your X application on a different machine and then have it display on your local machine. So it's a really I would say clean interface to know exactly what's being sent back and forth. There's no trickery that the OS can do under the hood. You can see it all over the wire. So it's a really fun. I thought it's a real protocol that real applications use, and you can see everything that's going back and forth. But the problem is with X11, almost everything uses the X11 library, so you don't actually get to see viscerally what data is being sent. You don't actually understand what's going on. They abstract all that away from you. And this X11 library is kind of a beast too. It's got like threads that it's doing. There's all sorts of memory being allocated that you don't know what's going on. There's errors happening that you can't get access to. And so, I was just like, what happens if we took all that abstraction away, and instead of like trying to provide a really nice, clean, simple interface to use X11, what if instead we just started adding things to help you send those messages over the wire? Like, we'll just give you some simple functions to serialize messages, and then see how far you can get trying to create an X11 application. So that's where I started. And I would say it was I learned a lot about how graphics work in general, and about X11. And I'm still developing that library today. And I'm actually right now I'm working on a cross-platform minimal abstraction close to what you would write if you were writing a native application for Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. If you were to write a fully X11 Win32 AppKit / core graphics on Mac OS, if you were to write that yourself, I'm trying to write a library that would basically be equivalent to writing all three of those yourself in Zig. And Zig sort of makes this unique because of its compile time features. So, you can sort of, using its compile time, compile that library interface down to something that would be as if you had written it natively for each one. So that's kind of a big, project I'm trying to. I've recently started now. I'm actively developing it, but yeah, it's a big. I would say a big culmination of a lot of these smaller projects I've done in the past. So I'm excited about that.
Interesting project. So I was going to ask before, were you a Windows developer or Mac developer or Linux developer? Because you're obviously looking at X11, so that kind of draws me to Linux or some flavor of Unix. And you mentioned the Mac, you're doing stuff on Windows. So which platform do you normally work on, or are you straddling all three?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm straddling all three. I do very little Mac OS development, but I have done some. Um, just not that much. I'm definitely a Linux Windows guy. Like I mentioned a few minutes ago, I have written a Linux user space, and that was a really critical piece to understanding how Linux works. So I'm really glad that I did that project. And when I was at HP, it's funny too, because I started out, we were doing, it's called Windows Embedded, Windows CE. So I kind of started out on that team. And then HP, about 6 or 7 years into that role, we transitioned to Linux. So I got big into Linux. So coming out of HP, when I got hired at Tuple, they hired me to be the Linux guy. And they had written a Linux app and they wanted to hire somebody to make it better. So I came on and I was like, hey guys, I used to do some Windows development back in the day. If you guys want to do a Windows port, let me know. And, a year into being at Tuple, they said, hey, we had more users asking for Windows. And said, hey, could you get a prototype going, like see how quickly you can get something. And I think it was after a couple of weeks, I basically had the app running on Windows natively. And then at that point they were like, oh, can you just keep working on this? And so I basically fully transitioned from Linux completely to Windows at that point. So yeah, it's definitely like kind of a 50-50 for me, both Windows and Linux. But right now I'm definitely in my Windows era. The last 2 years, I've just been deep diving into Windows, like really learning how the platform works. So yeah, I'm Windows era right now, but I might transition. Maybe I'll be Mac OS next year. We'll see. But
That's interesting. An awful lot of people I know that work on Linux wouldn't move to Windows, literally, if you paid them. So it's interesting that you've done that. So a quick couple of things. Windows CE, does that still exist? I remember using that in 2002. I thought it died a death years ago.
It definitely died some deaths. I think they used it for the Windows Phone, right? And then
yeah, I think it did pivot into that, didn't it?
Yeah, and then I remember one of the big reasons why we transitioned away from it was because Microsoft was dropping support for it. But I think it still is alive in something. I don't remember what they're using it for, but I feel like I've heard its name still for something. But I have to look that up.
Interesting. I do not miss working on that. Not the highlight of my career. We did some really interesting stuff with that company, but Windows CE always felt like a sort of half-invested thing that they were pushing. Weren't quite committed to all the tooling. So it's kind of like, yeah, you should use it, but we're not committing just in case you don't.
Yeah, and HP wasn't using it because they wanted to. I think because we had to pay for a license for every printer. So we started out with Windows XP, and then they were like, oh, I think we can make the CE thing work, and we'll save like a few dollars for every printer. And so it ended up being worth it. But yeah, it was actually a really big pain to transition, because I think we had to re-implement a lot of the same stuff that XP already gave us. But
as you say, when you're shipping that volume of printers, $1 or $2 a printer, it's big money, isn't it? Cool. So you've mentioned Tuple there, and you're now working Tuple. Let's dig into that in a minute. With first of all, what's it like going from HP to Tuple? And you're going from a enterprise of tens of thousands of people, massive company HP, to tens of thousands to 10, basically.
Yeah. That's like 2 orders of magnitude. For me personally, I love being in a small company, and I don't think it's for everybody though. It probably fits my personality, but yeah, I think a lot of like the intuitive people can intuit, what the difference would be. You're going to have a lot more impact than a smaller company. Um, you can't hide. So in a big company, I probably could have spent months and done absolutely nothing and just, oh yeah, I'm working on so and so or whatever. But that's definitely not going to happen in a small company. So some people may like that or not like that, but it was striking to me how much more motivating it is to see the impact you're having on users, and in some cases directly interacting with people using your product. Because I spent so long working at HP and never getting that. And I know a lot of people, they don't start out at the big company, so they get that right away. But yeah, as somebody who didn't get that right away, that was a huge benefit, I would say, seeing that. Um, and also, I mean, Tuple specifically, it was really awesome coming into. Some people will be familiar with Ben Orenstein, and he was just a great person to work with, and other people at Tuple as well. There was really smart people, really I would say unique and entrepreneurial people who was really, it was just really cool to like um, join a company with a lot of young people who were really smart and working alongside those people. So you're not going to get that on every small company. But yeah, Tuple is also unique because it wasn't a venture capitalist company. It was sort of bootstrapped from the founders and without any outside investment. So you don't see that a lot nowadays. But it worked really well. They were able to become profitable quickly, and I think part of that is because of the pandemic, and they were basically fulfilling a big hole that suddenly appeared that year, and so there was some good timing mixed in with that. But yeah, they ended up doing really well and being able to capitalize on that opportunity.
So, on the topic then of Tuple, again, I first came across Tuple in 2022. Now, I just joined, had some licenses, and people were using it for pair programming. First time I heard of it, but the people that were using it were a big fan. Certainly for myself, it seemed like a major step forward from us having tried to use VS Code Live, which always seemed to flake out and fail, or just doing a Teams call and screen sharing. In fact, that's what we're doing for most of the time, a Teams call, screen sharing, creating a branch on GitHub and pushing it up whenever we swap drivers. So, yeah, did you do pair programming before you joined Tuple? Or are you new to pair programming as well as building tools for it?
Yeah, it was funny. I did have a very memorable pair programming experience at HP, and this was with an older developer, and he had been working on, it's called Jet Direct. So this is like the interface that the main printer board would talk with the finishing engine. So the thing that would staple and collate your page, it has all these fancy features. So this guy, he worked with, let's see, so we were working with Canon. So we would have been working with guys from Japan co-developing with Canon on this interface, and he'd been there for, I want to say, over 20 years. So he was extremely familiar with this interface, and I really enjoyed pair programming with him. I was creating a simulator for these devices, and so he would sit alongside me, and I would be programming, and it was really fun too because I'm really, I would say, really quick with typing and navigating. I use Emacs, and so he just had so much fun watching me program. And I would have so much fun just asking him questions about this old interface that they've created so long ago, and all his knowledge, really deep knowledge of this stuff. And it was just a perfect synergy. And so I really enjoyed that. And, it's there's also the relational aspect to it. When you have somebody working with you, for me at least, it's a lot more motivating to make something good and to make sure that you cover all your bases. You have somebody like with you in the trenches, is the human factor that you don't always think about. I do find like when I'm pairing, I'm a lot more willing to make sure that we're doing everything that we need to be doing and covering all the tests, all the cases and things like that. So yeah, I enjoyed pair programming, but I hadn't, it's not something I do all the time either. There are times when I don't think pair programming makes sense. It definitely takes like a little bit of your brain to manage the pairing part. So you lose a little bit of your ability to just stop and think through the problem. So for really, I would say deep or complicated work where you have a really tricky problem, it may not make sense to pair program. But then again, if you have somebody there to bounce ideas off of, there's that too. So having a mix of both, I would say, is ideal.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it for solving exactly those tricky issues.
Oh yeah.
Again, particularly when we've been in the office and we could pull up a whiteboard and have laptop or screens here, whiteboard here, and better go through the tricky things together and figure them out. So that's where I've particularly enjoyed it. It's not quite as good an experience, particularly when you're doing it over like a Teams call or Google Meets call. When you're screen sharing to do that, you can't have that whiteboard and just scribble on things and draw pictures and get into a good debate about it. But it's interesting. How about then at Tuple? How much pair programming are you doing? Building a tool for pair programming?
Yeah, that's kind of interesting, actually. Let's see. So we had a guy who I sort of brought up on Windows. His name was Matt. And so we were doing a good amount of pairing. I was teaching him about Windows. He ended up transitioning to another role. And since then, it's just been me basically on Windows. So I actually do a lot less pairing recently. And I do kind of miss that, having somebody to regularly pair with on the stuff that you work on. But I still, I occasionally work on other areas and I'll pair with people. And I definitely enjoy that. But yeah, I would say right now I'm lacking a little bit of pairing that I used to get more previously.
It's that Windows effect that nobody wants to work on Windows.
Yeah, nobody wants to work on. Yeah, I think I'm the only person at Tuple who can really do native Win32 programming right now. So yeah, if it's any of that stuff, it's just going to be me.
Cool. Yeah, I'm in a way I'm not surprised. I don't miss working with Windows. Now that I'm not in an enterprise environment and I can choose, I've switched fully to Mac OS.
So do you enjoy like Mac OS programming specifically? Like, do you get into like AppKit or Core Graphics or anything like that?
I don't do anything that's platform specific. I just like having a Mac because it just works. I can focus on the things that matter. I'm probably not being fair. Linux is probably a lot better these days, but I remember setting up a Linux machine back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and it was more work than I wanted to do. Again, wasn't necessarily that terribly hard, but you spent a lot more time doing it than I did on getting to what adds the value. So now I like the fact that I can open up a brand new Mac, quick couple of installs of Homebrew, and I've got all the tools I need. I can get going. I install Chrome, run a couple of Homebrew commands to get Go or Python on there, and then I've got everything I need. I can just get going.
Oh yeah, and you don't need Xcode to do Go, because I hear people have a hard time like getting Xcode going.
Yeah, I haven't used Xcode for the backend, but they do have a kind of headless SDK bit that I think, I can't remember, one of the tools I've installed, might even be Lust pulled it in. Something has pulled it in. I've definitely seen it being pulled in by Homebrew, but Homebrew just takes care of it. It installs the bits it need, and I haven't had to worry. So, like I say, a couple of Homebrew commands and install Chrome, and I've got a MacBook or Mac Mini up and working how I want it. It's just ready to go.
What editor do you use on there?
At the moment, I am using a lot of the JetBrains tools. They kindly gave me a trial license for them, and I've long been a PyCharm user, but I've now started using Golang as well.
Oh, okay. That's cool.
I've used VS Code quite a lot. Back in the days when I did Windows development and used C++ a lot, I was a big fan of Visual Studio and Visual C++. I really like that IDE. I thought that was
which version of Visual Studio do you remember?
I'm showing off the grey hair now.
Yeah.
Visual Studio 6 was the one that really sold it to me. I'm going back to 99.
I remember them by the years.
This was before they used years.
Oh, okay. Let me see.
Visual Studio 6. I think it was 99. I want to say 99.
Released in 1998.
98 then, yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's an old one. When I was at HP, we were using 2008. That might be version 8 or 9. But I actually really version 2008 was like actually really nice. Like it ran super fast. I mean, it didn't look cool. Like it didn't look all fancy schmancy like the new versions, but it was perfect. Like it was solid, worked really well. I think we upgraded to like 20, I can't remember which version, some other newer one, and everything got slower and bogged down, and it was just much more of a slog after that.
Yeah, I think Visual Studio 6 was the first one that was really fast.
Mm.
Mostly worked pretty well. There were a few times when it crashed, but mostly it worked okay. And it was just such a big step forward from what I had before. So I really liked it. I think the only thing that was comparable at the time was Delphi, which again was a really nice environment, but I was a bit of a snob. As someone that came from C, Pascal felt like a bit of a toy language, and I wasn't that. But Delphi was an amazing idea, amazing environment for being a GUI programs on Windows. I think so far ahead of its time, and it's a shame that Borland messed it up because they ported some of that to C++ Builder, which was, again, a great IDE and a great platform for doing development on Windows.
Yeah, I think were they using Windows Forms? Do you remember?
I think it predated Windows Forms.
Oh.
So, yeah, they were, I think Delphi and C++ Builder both built their own stuff on the raw Win32 API.
Oh,
so not even
really?
MSC and predated .NET and all that.
That's cool.
Yeah, I think their library was called OWL. I think it was. It just built straight on the native Windows API. So all that lovely C with all that Hungarian notation that was hidden away in the Windows that most people don't remember the pain of touching.
I mean, that Tuple uses a lot of those same sort of APIs now. We kind of went through an evolution though. The very first prototype I did of Tuple on Windows was using straight up like what you're describing. I would refer to like most of it as like GDI. So like using the built-in button windows and like the built-in. Our first settings window was just a list of checkboxes using like the native checkbox, which looked horrible. And I remember Ben like made fun of me multiple times for how the settings window looked. And we eventually, when we have to start doing transparency, GDI no longer really works. It didn't really support transparency for a lot of things. And so they made GDI Plus, which was a C++ library. And that these both have the main problem of they don't run on the GPU, and they used to though. I hear so. I hear that the GDI API, it's not written like you're calling functions to like fill in your image in memory. It's all abstracted away from you, so it can definitely run on the GPU. But I've heard that they transitioned to making GDI only run on the CPU. But it used to be on the GPU. So I don't know why they did that, but nowadays you're supposed to use like DirectX and stuff. And so Tuple has sort of made that same evolution where we were using GDI. We've now transitioned to using Direct 2D for a lot of things, DirectX, Direct 3D in some cases. And so I've sort of gone through the same evolution as Windows itself, learning those different APIs and learning when, why you would use one over the other. You still use a lot of the old legacy APIs to get the new stuff going. But yeah, you definitely want to be using the new stuff nowadays. It's much faster, runs on the GPU, looks nice, transparency works. But it's a lot to learn. Like it takes so long to learn all this stuff, and not everybody enjoys it. So
yeah, back when I was doing GUI stuff, it was mostly MFC.
Okay.
Then Microsoft for a little while were pushing ATL, was going to sort of replace MFC, but again, it never felt as though they fully committed to that. It felt like we've done this common thing, and we should have a more C++y, more modern templated version of MSC, but they didn't feel like they fully committed. And I guess they weren't, because that's why we got all the .NET platform. And I don't hear anybody mention MSC or ATL for a few decades now.
Yep. And now they're on WinUI, which is it kind of feels similar to me what you're describing with the ATL stuff, but I don't know. The WinUI stuff is interesting. I find that it doesn't perform very well. I mean, even just going into like the system settings, half the time, like for me at least, the window doesn't even come up, or it just comes up blank, and then it like can't figure out the DPI. Like it's just Microsoft can't even make its own stuff work well with it. So I don't know about you trying to get other people to use it, but
That's why those Linux guys don't want to come back to Windows.
yeah, I understand.
Cool. So I also heard that you're a big fan of the Handmade philosophy. I hadn't heard of that until Jack mentioned it. So what is the Handmade philosophy?
Yeah, I would say it probably all got started with Casey Muratori. Have you heard of him at all? Or
I have, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so Casey Muratori and then Jonathan Blow is kind of in that same space as well. But a lot of people really, I think, resonate with their frustrations with programming, I would say, and I definitely relate as well. I'm a big proponent of writing really good software. Every time like a piece of software like bugs out, doesn't work, doesn't do what I expect, or runs really slowly, it pains me, and it feeds my passion and motivation to make good software. And so that I think that's really what I share in common with the Handmade community is it's a lot of people who feel very similarly. And so they do a conference. It's run by Abner, and they do one in Seattle. So I've been to that the last few years, and I think I got introduced to Handmade through Zig, actually. So the creator of Zig, Andrew, and the VP, I forget his title, but Loris, he's the VP of community, I think, at Zig. So they're big Handmade fans as well. So we all go to the Handmade conference in Seattle, and then they started one in Boston, which is really cool. I didn't go to that one, but Tuple's actually in Boston, so I should go to that and then go visit my coworkers at Tuple in Boston. But anyway, yeah, they do some really cool talks. Like one in particular, oh gosh, what is his name? There's a guy who did a really cool talk. He sails around the world, so he lives in his boat. And in his talk, he discussed how all of his electronics, like his iPhone and all this, just stopped working once you got away from land, like once you got out into the ocean. And so he ended up doing a lot of NES programming while he was on his boat, because an NES, it doesn't need the network, and it's got a pretty simple CPU. And so he really learned how that CPU worked and started writing. And he really got into this idea of code lasting a long time. So we were talking in the bar, and the way he described it was, I want to write my software in a language. And he's talking about like I think he's talking about the source code and the binary synonymously, maybe. But he said he wants to be able to represent the entirety of what his program can do on a shirt. And so that's his philosophy is has to fit on a shirt. And you can actually, I mean, you can make an entire Turing complete language with like one instruction. I think people have proven that there's like certain x86 instructions that are Turing complete, like single instructions. And that's probably going to the extreme. Like you can write your program in this one instruction. So his philosophy is basically if you add a few more, like maybe 30 instructions, now you can actually or human can reasonably write their software in that. So that was kind of his deal, which was really, really fun to like learn about. I don't know that I have any practical use for this, but it was really cool. And the Handmade community is filled with people like that, I would say, which I just find fascinating and love hearing these people talk about it.
Yeah, it's an interesting philosophy, and I think I'm torn on two sides of that. I'm very much a pragmatist in that we like code to create business value.
Right.
Just build whatever delivers a business value. On the flip side, it does pain me when I see something that I'm like, this is like 50 lines of code to do something quite trivial. Why have I got a 20 megabyte binary that's produced out of the back of it? And then when I come in to distribute it, I package up all this, gump with it, and you end up with 100 megabyte distributor. This was like 50 lines of code. Why is it so ridiculously big?
You're speaking my language right now. That's the
So yeah, I kind of straddle both sides of that. It's an interesting one to face. Cool. What haven't we talked about, Johnny, that we should have talked about?
I don't know. I feel like we've had a good conversation overall. I'm sure I'm supposed to talk more about Tuple and all the cool stuff there and be a good employee for Tuple. But I don't know. I just enjoy talking about programming. I guess I should mention the one really big thing that's coming for Windows for Tuple is something called AppVal. And the really cool thing about that is I don't know any other application that's been able to pull this off. But it's basically lets you share your screen and exclude applications from your screen share. So we were able to implement this on Mac OS with some difficulty, and with a lot of difficulty, I was able to figure out a way to do this on Windows, and it involved having to add something called a Windows hook, because Windows doesn't let you exclude other windows from a screen capture, but they do have a mechanism to do it. You just can't do it for other processes. So I ended up finding a way to get around that using this hooks mechanism. So yeah, we were able to get it working on Windows. You're able to exclude windows. You're able to see which windows are excluded with a fancy little border that follows it around. And it all runs pretty smoothly. And so we're excited for people to try it out and see how it goes. So yeah, I don't know. I'm excited to use it too. It's it's going to be interesting.
So on that note, we talked briefly about pair programming. A lot of people aren't going to know what Tuple is. So obviously you do. You work for Tuple. I've used it briefly in 2022. For anyone that's listening that doesn't know what Tuple is and wants to use it and is a fan of pair programming, can you briefly describe what Tuple enables them to do?
Yeah, I would say like in one line, it's basically like screen sharing that doesn't suck. So, you can get on, we have a lot of software where you can get on a call and talk to somebody. But if you ever want to pair program and you ever want to have somebody control your screen, or if you want to draw on their screen, it's just, I would say it's the best thing out there that I've found that lets you do that really easily and intuitively. So yeah, if you're doing pair programming specifically, there's nothing that beats it. It's surprising that there's kind of a lack of this sort of software that lets you easily pair program and switch who's driving and things like that. But after having implemented the Windows port of it, I can understand why. Like it's actually a really tricky thing to get right and get working well and smoothly. So we put a lot of effort. Something I told Jack was the Windows app, the Windows port of Tuple is actually written for Windows. Most software runs on Windows, but a lot of it actually isn't written for Windows. It's just written in a cross-platform way. And there's trade-offs for that, right? Having that cross-platform is definitely good for developing quickly. But if you really want all your native performance, you want that bare metal processing speed, sometimes you gotta talk to the platform directly. So we've taken a lot of time and effort to do that for users on Windows.
So we're kind of back to that point, aren't we? That if you use something like WX Windows or Qt, you get that cross-platform element, you get that abstraction, but you're piling in a whole lot more stuff.
Right.
Or if you go for more of that handmade philosophy, you get the performance, but you have to do a bit more work yourself.
Yeah, that's a good summary of the trade-off, I would say.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much for your time, Johnny. Where can people learn more about Tuple and your talks and your streaming?
You can find me on GitHub. My username is Marler8997. So a lot of my work is published there. On Twitch, I occasionally stream. You can find me at twitch.tv/Johnny Marler, JOHNNYMARLER. And then I have a YouTube channel.
Tell you what, send me the links for that and we'll put all those in.
Cool. Let's do that.
Yeah, because I enjoyed watching you talk, getting Doom winning on X11. That was great to see. Any plans for Quake now? As a big fan of Quake,
I haven't thought about doing Quake. Is that something I should do?
Maybe. Let's see if anyone reaches out and suggests it.
Okay.
All right. Cool. Thank you very much, Johnny.
All right. We'll see you later.